Welcome to the 108 Effect. This podcast was created as a space to pause, to breathe, and to explore the questions that we don't always have time or permission to ask. Across cultures and traditions, the number 108 represents completion, connection, and alignment. It reminds us that there is a rhythm to life, something both practical and mysterious, that links who we are with something greater. Here, we gather to talk openly about consciousness, intuition, life, death, and the moments that quietly change us. Through honest conversation and shared experience, we explore what it means to trust ourselves, to listen inward, and to live with greater awareness. If you've ever felt a pull towards something deeper, or wondered if there's more to this human experience than what we see on the surface, you're in the right place. So take a deep breath, settle in, and join us as we begin this journey together. This is the 108 Effect. Welcome back to another episode of the 108 Effect. We're so glad to have you back. And if you listen to our first episode, you'll kind of get that we're a little weird and we're inviting others that have similar or even different experiences than we are to come join us. And we give you a place where you can talk. And hopefully we'll start getting some stories from you soon. Speaking of weird, we do get together often, me and Tina, and we talk about what weird thing happened to you this week. So Tina, what weird thing happened to you this week?
Yeah. I guess in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty normal for us. And for probably a lot of other people too. That's why we're doing this podcast, so that others that have, like you said, similar abilities, or even people that are just curious about, what is possible. I mean, what happened to me this week, I'll get into it, was we had class, our normal class, which we study. We try to study our abilities and try to figure out, different variations of energy, how to identify where something is coming from. So we were on class and we were talking about specifically reading energy and trying to figure out the different variations of that. So we were talking about I had a foreign exchange student for a year. And we had discussed him and his mother. And we were just generally talking about them, just nothing specific. And that night, after our class was over, I went to bed and I had a very specific dream about my foreign exchange student's mother. The dream was that I went to meet her in another country. No clue where the country was. I guess it wasn't really important because it didn't come into play. But just for everybody's information, they are located in France. So where I was meeting her, not really sure, but I was there. And, it was a little bit, interesting because she speaks English, some English, and I speak very little French. And when I say very little, I mean, I can introduce myself in basics, and that's about it. But anyway, so we were in the stream together, and it almost seemed very real because she was trying to communicate with me and seemed of me back with her. It was a little bit odd for a few minutes, and then we got into the flow again because she had stayed with us for about a week or 10 days or something like that. And so we're familiar with each other, and we care for each other. And so it seemed like we were just back into the flow. So then she was telling me that she had to leave and she had to get on a bus. So I was like, all right, great. Well, I got to go too. So let me walk you out to the bus. So I walk her out to the bus, and she's standing in line, and it looks like there's a bunch of moms getting on this bus. And she says, I said, where are you going? And she said, we're going to go to a basketball game. Now, I don't know how, many times that happens in France. Maybe they do it all the time. I have no idea. But so anyway, she says she's going to go to this basketball game. And the next thing I know, she introduces me to this basketball player that she knows. He walks over and he starts to talk to me. And he's asking me, did she enjoy her time in the U.S.? And did she help me, give me any pointers for French meals? Because both her and I love to cook. And when she did come, we did some really intense French meals. And so I was telling him, I was like, yeah, we had a great time. And she was very helpful. And he was this very tall, I would say like, I don't know, maybe 6'2", 6'4", not unusual for a basketball player. But he was pretty tall. And he was a Black man. And he was very kind. And he spoke very good English. So that was it. But I thought it was so interesting the next day that I thought, you know what, let me reach out to her and let me, let her know I had a dream. This way I could just kind of open a conversation because we hadn't talked for about two or 3 weeks. And she wrote me back and she said, you're not going to believe this, but the night that you had that dream, we actually went to a basketball game. I was like, what? That's crazy. And then she said that she would send me a picture because they met the star basketball player. Here's where it gets even stranger. I mean, I know some people would like to say that's a coincidence. I personally don't believe in coincidences. So I think it's pretty odd that that happened in general. So if it would have ended there, I would have been like, wow, that's pretty cool. But they send the picture of my French exchange student and this basketball player. And it's the guy in my dream. And that's where it got really strange.
Yeah.
It's the guy I talked to. And I was like stunned by it for a second, because weird things happen to us all the time, right? But some things are weirder than others and don't happen as often. This is and I told her and she was like, exclamation points on the message back. But this is the second time in my life that has happened to me. And
do you think that you were seeing him through your own eyes or possibly somebody else's eyes? Like, did you feel like you in the dream? Was there any indication it was you, or could it have been somebody else at that game?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when I did reach out to our mentor and our teacher, she said the same thing. She said, did you see him through, your exchange student's eyes? And I thought, it didn't seem like it to me, to be honest. It just seemed like it was me having a conversation with him in this dream. So I can't say that was the case for me because I know that does happen to other people, and especially for you, that has happened before. And, our mentor also said that, that happens to her a lot. So, but she knows it and she recognizes it. And I don't, that wasn't the case for me. But somebody else had mentioned, I had talked to another, a good friend of ours, who I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
And I told him the story and, he said that he feels like the gentleman in the picture, the basketball player, he feels like he could have had an event at the same exact time or something similar, like a dream about me, and doesn't even know who I am. Like the two events happened at the same time.
Some poor basketball player's like, who's that hot blonde? Yeah,
he's saying that. He's like, who's that grandmama? But but it was really funny. So it's really interesting though that happened. The other thing that we could say is that there was that energetic cord that was created based on the fact that we had the conversation about them earlier that night. And then also we were speaking of reading energy. So maybe that's how that was formed. And maybe that's all I did was read the energy. But it's interesting that I saw him and that he spoke to me.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about, if you listen to our last episode, you'll learn that I have visions sometimes. And Tina, that when I have those, I'm always in the position of somebody that's in the situation.
Yeah.
Actively watching something happen. Like I'm either sitting in a car or I've gone up to a vendor at a craft fair or something. These are the kind of things I have these visions about, and I meet these people, but I can't tell if it's me or something else. But the other thing that doesn't happen, which I'm completely envious of, is that there's confirmation that you had that validation. And like you said, not when you have as many coincidences as you've experienced, I've experienced, others like us have experienced, when you get that validation, that's like the best feeling in the world,
100%.
And I imagine people who have had shared dreams, when they find out later, they're like, oh, and it's just this moment of pure excitement that something magical happened, in that minute. Yeah.
I will say for this time, even though it did shock me initially, I wasn't as shocked as the first time it happened. Because that was the first time it happened to me when we were studying with our group and we were practicing reading people.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember the specifics at this point, but I remember there being a little boy, and the only way that I could describe him was that he looked like alfalfa. I said, he looks like alfalfa.
Yeah.
And the next day, they sent me the picture, and it was the boy that I saw in my mind.
Yeah.
That was shocking to me. That was absolutely shocking to me. And I don't know why. Like, the weird things have happened my whole life, but I guess because I was actively trying to read someone, and, it's not something I do. It's something we practice just to get better and hone in our skills, but it's not something that it's not my life goal that I want to go out and read strangers or anything like that. I'm just trying to figure out myself when I'm doing these types of things. So
I remember telling you weeks ago that there are times when something's happening so often that I'm still in awe by some of the things that I experience, because they can be rare. But we've learned through introspection, through meditation, and recently through channeling, that you can increase those abilities and you can start to expect even more magical things to happen. Now, I do know that last episode we did talk about channeling being something we would discuss. And we even discussed it was a possibility for this episode. But something in the news just kind of moved us a little bit. And you recommended a documentary. And
that was recommended to me.
Yeah. And I literally watched it I think it was over a half an hour ago. So I literally watched it because you badly wanted to discuss it. And it is something newsworthy. It is really cool. And we will move on to channeling later. But this is happening now. And it's literally out of this world. So why don't you tell us what documentary you recommended to me?
So the documentary name is A Moment of Contact. And it was an event that happened in, I'm going to butcher this, but Varginha, Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And 1996.
Yes.
And and I think I mixed it up with another event that happened in Brazil, because Brazil seems to be a hotspot for
and Peru.
UFO encounter.
Peru had a lot of these. And what we're talking about is the full name of the documentary, which can be found on YouTube, Amazon Prime. But it's the Moment of Contact, new revelations in alien encounters. And what's very interesting is at the beginning of this documentary, they start talking about crash retrieval. So if you've been paying attention to government congressional meetings and discussion about UAPs and USOs, and these are unidentified anomalous phenomenon. I have to remember that every time and kind of get away from UFO. But they start the documentary with a list of verified crash retrievals, where this is the second time in the last 2 years that there's been confirmation that the Roswell incident was real.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's huge.
It's huge. The whole thing that is coming forward right now is absolutely fascinating, because this is stuff that people have been talking about for many, many years. And you know, a couple of my friends were always fascinated by UFOs. I personally witnessed one myself years ago, and I think I was in my late 40s when it happened, but I hadn't experienced anything prior to that. And it's interesting because you don't know if it's the energy of the people. You know, we've kind of found our tribe, and everybody has different things that they're interested in. But I think that it's really important for people to start to understand that we are not alone, and we never really have been. Yeah. So what did you think?
Well, I think your words to me, you said it was one of the most verifiable and
recent
admission to something that was very real. And if you haven't seen it yet, we highly recommend it. We are going to discuss it. We are going to discuss some things in it. And there really isn't a whole lot of spoilers, because this event did happen in 1996. And it's something that Tina and I have talked a lot about, what we call soft disclosure. We really believe that the government is slowly allowing us to be comfortable with the fact, and I say that deliberately, of non-human intelligence and what that means. And this soft disclosure has been revealing over the last 3 or 4 years through some of the best in UFO lore, like George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. They are in the forefront of making sure that this is something that is finally admitted by our governments. I say governments because other countries are facing the same thing. And particularly in this documentary, the witnesses to the event talk a lot about their fear from the military and their own governments and polices to even discuss this. So that's what makes this documentary so good. So how did I feel about it? I walked away literally going, I knew it, you know? And it kind of goes back to that confirmation we were just talking about with your dream, that being validated. And there's so many people out there just, you know, that for years have seen things, have witnessed, have had encounters. There have been abductions. And I hate that so many of them have passed, being ridiculed for something that is now coming forward as truth. And that's very sad, you know?
Yeah, that is very sad, because a lot of people, that's why people didn't come forward, right? And that was the whole the whole narrative that the governments were trying to put out there, because they didn't want people to let the bourgeoisie know, you know, the regular folk know that there's something else besides us here. Because, you know, I think originally perhaps, you know, it was done maybe with good intentions, because people would have panicked. I think we're a different kind of people now. And I think that they've been dripping it in since 2017 so that we can get used to the idea that we're not alone.
I have an analogy. It's kind of funny. Yeah. You know, I can't help it. I have a brother that for years, the whole family knew he was gay. Okay. So he comes out to my grandfather after years and years. He goes, "Grandpa, I'm gay." And my grandfather looked at him and said, "No shit." You know, and I feel like this is a perfect analogy. I think that's what I think a lot of people will say when and if it is ever disclosed that, yes, we are not alone. We have evidence, et cetera, et cetera. But this documentary provided quite a bit of evidence. Was there a part in the documentary that just kind of blew you away?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it was the 3 little girls who came upon the alien that had been out for a day. I think it was for a day or so.
Yeah.
And they were just walking, along a path that they normally walk along, and they look over to a wall. And if I remember correctly, it was the girl was just looking because the graffiti on the wall got her attention, and she was looking at the graffiti. And there at the base of the wall was an alien, and it startled her. She was only 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she looked right at him or, her, and if there's sexes, I'm not sure. And it looked back, and she could tell that it was scared, and she felt empathy.
The empath in me, just my heart broke, knowing how scared it was. Yeah.
It had to be frightened.
She was very frightened.
Yeah, and she said that it was, definitely. She wasn't sure if it was sweating or if they're, because the skin looked very oily, but whatever the creature was in the Brazilian sun, and we don't know how long it was there. We don't know what it requires, if it requires water or shade or, but it scared her, and she screamed, and, and they ran. And, but I think she showed it to her older sisters before she did that. And, so they all saw it. And, the thought of that poor little creature being there, and then there was 2 others. I was shocked because the military had shut down the area with the intention of not having anyone find the crash. And I don't know if they realized that there had been occupants in the crash that had escaped or had gotten out of the crash. I don't think they did, because they weren't the only people in the community to come across this creature. Right. There was 2 other that were found. So that was shocking to me. Shocking to me that so many different pockets of that community found these, all these other people found these creatures that were not military, and they've come forward. And I think there was a lot of talk.
There was a lot of talk about how quickly the military got there, which was similar to a couple of other crash retrievals. It makes me think that that there are military, Air Force, whatever, governments watching the skies,
always
and
watching,
know that they're coming before. Because they were there. They were right there almost immediately.
Right. They have to be always watching, because that we've heard this time and time again, that within minutes of any kind of a crash, they're there. So, when they say that these drones in the United States, specifically New Jersey, that big drone incident that we had not that long ago, they're lying. They're absolutely not telling the truth.
They definitely are.
They're watching the skies already.
Well, those same drones are appearing over Denmark and Germany and other from airports to Air Force bases. There's something going on. Now, there was 100%. One thing that really caught me off guard and was unexpected watching this, was how many of the witnesses identified almost word for word. Each witness talked about the smell.
Yeah, I know. I was going to bring that up.
So these witnesses would smell, they attributed the smell to like a sulfur smell, an ammonia smell, but much worse, much stronger. Yeah. And not only that,
it lingered for days.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. One of the doctors said it infiltrated his respiratory system. And not only did the smell in the hospital, where they ultimately worked on one of the beings, that the smell permeated throughout that particular part of the hospital, and they had to shut it down.
Right.
And then he talked about for days it was in him. He could smell it for days and had just permeated within him.
I believe one of the witnesses said that they were trying to get the smell out by like washing their nose with pneumonia or something. I forget what they said, but it was something strong, and they weren't able to remove the smell.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's not the first time that that's been reported. That smell,
See, I
that
haven't
odor, the
heard that
pneumonia.
before. Yeah.
Yeah. There's been other cases that have reported a similar smell. So, and you wonder, is it like one species that has that odor, or is it, that we're incompatible, physically with these creatures, and does that go across multiple creatures? Is that why the governments didn't want to tell us? Like, I don't know. But I have heard that before.
Well,
And then there was the police officer,
mhm. Oh,
who's
Chereze, Marco Chereze, I think was, I might be off, but that's very close to the name. He was the
Yeah.
one who physically
Mhm.
Encountered the one that the little girls had seen and captured it, and eventually died a few months later from an infection that they could not determine where it had come from. There was bacteria that the medicines of the day that we have as humans could not fight.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah, and you wonder,
was
I think
bizarre.
what the doctor said, if I remember correctly, was that there was a scratch, and they felt like that's where the
That's
infection
right.
came
Yeah.
in. And they don't know if the creature, accidentally scratched him or intentionally scratched him because it was scared. But he died. He died in a week. It was a week,
Yeah.
I think. I think we'd
Oh,
have
I
to
thought,
check that out.
okay.
But I believe it was a week.
Yeah.
And he was only 23 years old.
Yeah. Young
and then the
man.
family was
Healthy.
pretty upset. Healthy, yeah.
Mhm.
There was nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
And then they, there was 2 police officers there, so he wasn't the only witness. The gentleman who passed away, the other police officer went into hiding, and still won't speak about. He's
Right.
part of the documentary. They go find him, and he
Yeah.
is not willing
He's
to
not
speak of
having
it.
it.
So Mhm.
The family, the mother of the 2 of the girls, was offered a lot of money to stay quiet or claim that that's not what they saw. And, she had a moral obligation to her own daughters to not have these girls live the rest of their lives being called liars or that it was a hoax or anything. And she actually turned down that money. And that was, I don't think I've ever been more proud of a mom, for her to say, I'm not going to, deny what I know my daughter saw. I believe her. And
Yeah.
and the
Well,
mom
no, I
did
think-
witness the smell.
yeah. I was going to say they took the mom back to that location.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she
Yeah.
did witness the smell. That's right. And let's talk about who offered her that money. Typical,
Oh, yeah.
and let's get into
What's
that.
so weird about, you hear about Men in Black all the time, right?
Yeah, you do.
And we've been hearing it about them since Roswell. And so, she described them as very tall men dressed in black. And there was one with a briefcase, typical. You couldn't get any more stereotypical. One with a briefcase that never said a word, and the other one that did all the talking. And
Good cop,
as
bad cop.
quietly as they arrived, they departed the same way, very quick. She couldn't even see a car or anything. But the man who eventually took the director, James Fox, that took him to the location of the crash site, he had the same thing happen, where he was told to not tell anybody, to not say anything, and the description of those men were very similar. I was blown away by...
And those men, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt,
That's
but those
okay.
men, when they came in, they actually had information about his wife. They mentioned
Yes.
his wife's name, where he lived.
Yeah.
Like they were threatening him. They were
That's
literally
why all these
threatening
people
him.
were scared.
Yeah.
The physician that ultimately worked on the being only came out to talk about what had happened, what he had witnessed personally, because the doctor that actually performed surgery on this being had actually died of a heart attack. And so this doctor that was there was part of the surgery and everything. He recently had a heart attack. And that just kind of said, I don't care anymore. I need to say what had happened, if not for the memory of the man who worked on this being, for people to know that we aren't alone. And it was moving to me how many people in this documentary were driven to tears about the emotional experience of one, meeting what one called a magical creature, to two, having to deny a truth and live with fear for over 20 years.
Right.
And to be able to just share it, they were driven to tears just to have that, off their chest.
Well, we can understand that because, I mean, how many years did we live without having anyone to talk to about our weirdness, but our immediate family, our husbands, like, how many, when somebody doesn't experience the same things you do to the same level that you do, it's not the same.
It's not, because the fear of being called crazy or, whatever. I remember, and at some point we'll get into Reiki healing and energy healing and that kind of stuff. But I remember sharing how excited I was to become a Reiki master. And I just heard through the grapevine, that there were people saying, oh yeah, she thinks she can heal people. Well, number one, I don't think I can. It's not me. But that I was like, oh, I sunk a little lower that day, and then had a neighbor who is convinced I'm a witch, and I sunk a little lower that day. I'm done with that, and just to tell our audience, that's why we're doing this, because there are more and more and more people that are coming out and telling their truths. And there seems to be more of this, these things are happening. Some people are calling it an awakening. And there was this one point near the end of the documentary where that guy refers to a being as something other than an alien. Do you remember that?
An angel.
Do you remember that moment? He's talking about, he goes, in his eyes, I saw a higher intelligence. Yeah. I saw magic in his eyes. And
I think he called him an angel. I do remember.
He did call him an angel. He says you could learn a lot just by looking in his eyes. Yeah. And he called him an angel.
He had a telepathic communication with him.
He did.
He said he could feel it. He could feel that he had been taken good, care of while he was there, and that he meant no harm. And he called him a magnificent creature. And he started to tear up and he said he was the size of a 7-year-old child.
Yeah.
And he had teardrop eyes and
they were red. When people talk about, they closely resemble what most people can identify with as grays. But he had this being, or these beings, there were 3 of them, had very red eyes. Now, what the audience might find interesting is tell them where the beings ended up, where their bodies ended up.
The good old USA. We stepped in and we grabbed them. We went in while the neurosurgeon was actually in the room with this creature and having this telepathic communication. God only knows what else would have been revealed had the doctor had more of an opportunity. But then the U.S. military literally busted through the door and took the creature.
And took the creature.
And then he was threatened, the neurosurgeon, and everyone in the hospital, as they typically do when they don't want you to tell your story, But I do want to bring up, did you remember the Gaia message I sent you about the creature that they had found? It was a skeleton. Trying to remember.
Oh, is this the one in? It's also in South America.
But this was a skeleton, or it looked like a mummified.
Yeah, the one he's kneeling, kind of hugging his knees, and he's got 3 fingers.
And he's got the 3 fingers skull. And the 3. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It resembles this.
He does. That was why I wanted to bring it up.
These beings had 3 fingers and 3 toes. They were very thin. There have been a
Mhm.
couple in the documentary. They show some illustrations from the girls that saw this thing. And there are some photographs out there. And what's interesting, why this is making the news is just recently, some of these people, some of these witnesses have come together and had a press conference. And this is just in the last couple of days. And we'll put a link to both of the press conference and to this documentary. We'll put that in our links
and
at
we'll
the
also
end.
put
But
the other documentary I'm talking about, which I believe is on ancient. It's not ancient aliens. No, it's not ancient civilizations. That's what it is.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll put all that information on there too, so that you can take a look.
Yeah, I got to spend some time with my mother this past weekend, and I was, she knows I've been weird my whole life, and I get it from her. So there you go.
Yeah.
But I was actually sharing with her some of the old Renaissance paintings, and the number of paintings that were painted not just by Leonardo da Vinci and not by Michelangelo, but many, many artists that had UFOs in the paintings. That's a whole different thing. That is something I just remembered in this moment. But, there are signs, even in Chinese literature, and there are drawings of spaceships that they have seen. And we're hearing now in the U.S. by the whistleblowers who are now protected, thanks to Congress, for coming out and sharing about crash retrievals. Right. And, it's kind of like I said, it's just like, yeah, I knew this.
But we're the minority. We're the minority of people that know it.
Yeah, that's crazy, because one thing that they mentioned, that the witnesses mentioned, and the doctors mentioned, and the police officers that worked in the mayor's office down in Varginha, Brazil, is that the press was stopped. The press was no longer free at that point. They weren't allowed in certain areas. They were not allowed to speak about it. Famously in Roswell, they fabricated a new story and then ridiculed the people who thought they saw a UFO when they know they did, and it's been proven now it did happen. But the press there's been a thumb down on the press. And in the documentary, Dr. Eric Davis, who is somebody who has been in front of Congress a lot, did mention that what happens is the press wants to know. They want to know. And then they ask and ask and ask all the right questions. But because of classified information, because of dangerous issues with giving out this classified information.
Right.
Yeah.
They sign
things that say, I will not disclose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
so he
exactly
basically said, we look at they look at the reporters and say, yeah, we know, but we can't tell you. So the reporter leaves with nothing
specific
to share
information.
with the public.
But, it's interesting because they're coming to the point now where they are speaking openly about crash retrievals and non-human intelligence. And
yes.
Even that is, we've come a long way with that, because they would never even speak of that before. They can't give specifics, right, even though they have details.
That is thanks to...
That's where you have to go into a SCIF.
Thanks to... Yes, and there's admissions that there's a number of things that have been talked about in these SCIFs. So SCIFs, if you don't know, are basically areas, rooms that are set up so that there's no infiltration, that nobody can hear anything, that nobody can, what's the word when you hack? It can't be hacked. The information can't be hacked. And so it is in secret. It is, I don't even think there's transcriptions. I don't know, but
it's called a sensitive compartmented information facility, SCIF.
Yeah. It's very secretive and contained and secure so that information doesn't leak. But the number of times the witnesses during these congressional hearings say, well, I can tell you if it's in a SCIF. So, and in this documentary, they actually confirmed that a lot of this information has been shared with congressmen and women in these SCIFs, and they have this information. But yet here we are again, public, citizens that don't know what is going on when it's clearly going on all around us, but we're being gaslit into believe, oh, they're just drones or they're just weather balloons and so on and so forth. So it is a big deal that these people in Brazil, they're happy to be able to share this because they know they're not the only ones.
Right.
So,
and they chose to come forward, and they flew all the way over here to have, a press conference in Washington, D.C. and have some Congress people attend and to put, their stories out there and to speak. And, that's, I give them a lot of credit because that's scary to come all the way here and to speak in front of a room full of people in another country and, to tell a very personal story that they told on the documentary, but it's different when you're speaking in front of, a room full of people and you're trying to recount everything. But they did an excellent job.
I do recommend to our audience that if you choose to watch this documentary, put on closed caption. There's a good amount of the documentary is in Spanish and Portuguese as they're speaking, and it's a lot easier to kind of understand them as they tell their stories. But knowing you, Tina, and knowing that you actually have a connection with a galactic family, just putting a little teaser out there to the audience. But, this is something we will talk about often. We'll share some of our own encounters. We'll share, we have a dear friend who has had some unusual encounters and some telepathic encounters with otherworldly beings, to put it in, I don't know. I through everything that we've been doing and everything, I don't feel comfortable calling them aliens anymore.
I know.
Or
it's a hard thing to,
terrestrials.
Yeah. ETs, creatures, it's hard to find their family, really. I mean, they are.
Right.
They're just a galactic family is what they are.
Right.
I mean, we don't know all the details of, the compatibility and, how we'll communicate other than telepathically. But I do think that we'll find a way. Yeah, we'll definitely find a way and we'll come
I think so too.
Yeah.
I do want to add that one of the things that we'll be doing going forward is inviting the audience to send us some of your stories. Our website, the108effect.com. There will be a place to submit some of your stories. We would love to share some of those on air and have some real discussions and by no means are we experts in any of these fields, but we are experts in the weirdness that has occurred and in growing what we have experienced. And maybe we have some feedback for you or can lead you in a different direction.
Yeah, maybe it's just to know that there's other people out there and they can share their stories and not be judged.
Exactly.
We've seen so much of it. And how many times have, I know for me personally, when it's an interesting thing because there's all these different things under the spectrum, right? You have ghosts, so to speak. You have aliens, you have, Bigfoot, you have fairies, you have, all these different things. And I know when I was younger, I was like, well, I've had a lot of experience with communication from past loved ones and, what I would consider the other side, which would be human for me. So when I had other experiences, when I started to find my tribe and other things started to happen, I thought, what? I don't even believe in that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How did that just happen?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you definitely won't be judged anymore by,
No,
not that I would have
not at
judged you
all.
in the
This
first
is-
place, but, I just didn't have any experience with those things. And now I do.
Yeah. So
So.
basically, we're your people. So,
Yeah.
So, thank you for joining us. And I think maybe we will talk about channeling a little bit more in the next episode. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. I have a bunch of channels put aside because I have my favorites. We can talk about how we get to that point where we start to channel, and then all the self-doubt that you have when you first start to do it, and how to get past that, and how you start to look back at your channels and you start to realize that this information is coming from a different place.
Yeah, we'll talk about where that comes from. Yeah, it's different for different people.
I mean, what we think, where we think it comes from. Again, we're not experts on anything. We're just trying to figure things out like everyone else. But we've been doing this a long time now, right?
A long time. But a lot has happened, and there's benefits to channeling. There's benefits to this camaraderie.
Yeah.
And, speaking for both of us, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm really glad. I think this is going to be wonderful. And I can't wait to read some stories. I can't wait. Thanks, guys.
As we close today's conversation, we invite you to take a moment and notice what resonated with you. Maybe it was a thought, a feeling, or a quiet knowing that surfaced as you listened. Whatever it was, trust that it arrived for a reason. The 108 Effect is about remembering that awareness begins within, that clarity doesn't always come from searching outward, but from learning to listen inward. Thank you for sharing this space with us, for your openness and for your willingness to explore the deeper layers of life alongside us. If this episode spoke to you, feel free to subscribe and follow along so that you can continue these conversations with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and trust the compass within. This is the 108 Effect.